Hi, I'm Clarissa Hale, and this year I wasn't invited to the family's annual yacht trip. No warning, no conversation, just gone. No one said a word, no call, no accidental CC on a planning email, nothing. But the part that stung wasn't the silence. It was how long I convinced myself it had to be a mistake. How many times I had sat at their tables, laughed at their jokes, brought the right gifts, convinced that I was one of them, convinced that I had a seat. Until one morning, I realized I never did. It was a Tuesday. Ordinary, quiet. I was home alone. Jackson had already left for a client meeting. He'd left behind the usual clues: an open laptop, his aftershave lingering faintly in the hallway, and half a banana abandoned on the counter. I made myself a cup of coffee, poured it into my favorite ceramic mug, the one with a small crack near the handle, the one I'd never bothered to replace. Because somehow, it feels like me. Imperfect, but still standing. I took it out onto the balcony, our little corner of Charleston. The sun had just climbed past the rooftops, spilling light across the railing. And that's when I did what I always do in the morning. Absently picked up my phone, opened Instagram, just for a scroll. And that's when I saw it. A boomerang video from my niece, champagne glasses clinking, sunlight sparkling on a white yacht in the background. The caption: Holloway Family Seaside Tradition, Year 7, can't wait to set sail. I blinked, froze mid-sip. That was our yacht, the one I helped buy, the one I personally negotiated, the one I'd quietly paid for 4 years ago when Jackson's family needed a boost and I believed in building something that lasted. I tapped the post, my fingers suddenly cold despite the warm mug in my hand. There they were. Delilah, my mother-in-law, smiling softly in her wide-brimmed hat, holding a mimosa like a queen. Genevieve, of course, center frame, with her perfectly curated pose. Her husband Beau, the cousins, the twin girls, even a friend I hadn't seen in years. Everyone, except me. And still, part of me tried to rationalize. Maybe they're doing a small version this year. Maybe I'll get the invite tomorrow. But then I noticed the little details, the new hashtag, the group photo clearly taken that morning, and one thing that snapped me back to reality: Genevieve's gold necklace, the one she only wears on the first day of the trip. They were already on board, already sailing, and no one thought to tell me, not even Jackson. My hands tightened around the mug. The heat was gone, the coffee had cooled. But I didn't feel sad, not exactly. What I felt was stillness. A strange, deep quiet inside me. Like something had finally settled. Like a truth had clicked into place. This wasn't an oversight. It was a decision. And somehow, that silence said more than words ever could. It happened later that afternoon. I was rinsing out a glass at the kitchen sink, sunlight pooling through the window, catching the edge of the faucet just right. It could have been any day, any moment. But then, my phone buzzed. A message. Not to me. Not meant for me. It was a screenshot, a group message thread, attached, a chart, cabin assignments. My name was on it, crossed out. And beside it, in fresh black text, Mila, yoga instructor. Mila, the same woman who once turned to me at a party and asked, "Are you Jackson's assistant? Or maybe his event planner?" I remember blinking at her then, unsure whether to laugh or to walk away. Now she was taking my room, on a yacht I bought. And still, I tried to tell myself it could have been a mix-up. Maybe a temporary name, a placeholder. Then the second message came in. A voice note. Genevieve. Her voice, light, casual, amused. She was mid-laugh when she said it. Well, at least the energy on board won't be so tight this year. So tight. Like I'd been the problem all along. Like my presence was something to fix. I set the glass down carefully in the sink. Not because I was shaken, but because something inside me had gone still, sharp, and suddenly focused. I didn't reply, didn't forward it, didn't ask for clarification. What do you say to something so intentional, dressed up to look like nothing at all? I walked over to the dining table and sat. Just sat. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and a clock ticking softly behind me. My hands were steady, but my jaw, it ached from clenching too long. Later that evening, I didn't bring it up at dinner, not at first. Jackson was scrolling stock alerts between bites of salmon, completely unbothered by the storm that had already landed in my chest. Her face didn't shift all at once, first the eyebrows. So I asked lightly, "Did you know your family's planning another yacht trip?" He glanced up. "Yeah, I think Mom mentioned something last week. They're still finalizing the list." I tilted my head. "Am I on the list?" He paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "Of course. Why wouldn't you be?" I smiled, just enough. "To be sure." He nodded and returned to his phone. "I'll double-check," he said. But he wouldn't, and I knew it. After dinner, I washed the dishes slowly, one by one, and as the water ran over my hands, I realized something. Sometimes silence doesn't mean peace. It just means no one wants to say the hard thing out loud. That night, lying in bed next to a man who hadn't noticed I was vanishing from his family's story, I stared at the ceiling fan as it spun slow, steady circles overhead. I didn't feel angry, not yet. What I felt was clarity. And before turning off the light, I opened my journal. In quiet, measured strokes, I wrote one sentence. "Watch, don't react yet." Because something in me knew. They were going to write me out of the story, and this time I was going to underline every sentence they tried to erase. That night, I brought it up at dinner. Jackson was halfway through a piece of grilled salmon, distracted, scrolling through market alerts like the world might crash without him. I kept my voice light, almost playful. "Did you know your family's planning another yacht trip?" He looked up briefly, fork still in hand. "Yeah, I think Mom mentioned something. I guess they're still finalizing the list." I tilted my head, just slightly. "Am I on the list?" He paused, just for a beat. Then, "Of course. Why wouldn't you be?" I smiled, just enough to smooth over the moment, just enough to keep the silence from tipping into tension. He went back to his phone. "I'll double-check," he added, without looking up. But he wouldn't, and I knew it. After dinner, I washed the dishes by hand, slowly, one at a time, not because there were many, but because I needed something to do with my hands. Funny how silence can say more than shouting. The water ran over the plates in steady streams, the sponge moving in circles like I could scrub away everything unspoken. That night, lying in bed next to a man who said he'd check, but never did, I stared at the ceiling fan, watched its blades slice through the air, again and again. And in that repetitive motion, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not hurt, just confirmation. This wasn't miscommunication. This was strategy. The next morning, it came. An email from the charter company. Subject line, "Cancellation confirmation." I opened it, read it once, read it again. "Your cabin reservation has been successfully canceled. Request submitted 3 days ago. By Genevieve Halloway." Not a misunderstanding, not an accident, a deliberate action. She had filed the cancellation herself. I didn't cry, didn't throw the phone across the room. I just stood there for a while, letting the glow of the screen fade as my fingers curled gently around the edges. Then, I hit forward, sent the email to myself, and printed it. One crisp copy, plain, sharp, unmistakable. I slid it into a manila folder from the bottom drawer of the hallway cabinet, the one labeled Taxes and Property. But it would have a new name soon, a more fitting one, something like Receipts. Because some truths don't need explanation, they just need documentation. 3 days later, I arrived at the Savannah Marina. No entourage, no announcement, just me, and a suitcase filled with documents and silence. I wore a simple black dress, structured, clean. Over it, a tan blazer that moved just slightly with the breeze. No jewelry except my wedding ring. No makeup. Because I wasn't dressing to impress anyone. I was dressing for a moment I had prepared for in silence. The kind of moment that doesn't need introduction, only timing. As I stepped onto the dock, the sea breeze pulled at the hem of my coat. The water shimmered like it knew what was coming. The suitcase rolled behind me, wheels clicking rhythmically on the wood planks. Not too fast, not hesitant, just steady. Then I saw them. The guests, the chatter, the champagne. And at the far end of the dock, Genevieve. Poised, polished, surrounded. She was mid-laugh, mid-story, a glass of something expensive in hand. When she looked up and saw me, then the lips, then the hand, frozen midair like a bad actor missing a cue. Next to her stood Jackson, not by my side, just there, always nearby, never with. I didn't look away, I didn't slow down. The distance between us narrowed, socially, emotionally, spatially. And then, just before I reached their little circle, a member of the yacht crew stepped forward. Tall, impeccable uniform, calm presence. He smiled, nodded, and said, clear enough for everyone to hear. Welcome back, Ms. Hale. The owner is now aboard. Not loud, but loud enough. And that's when I saw it. Genevieve's hand trembled slightly. Her jaw tightened. The kind of expression people make when they realize the script they wrote has just been rewritten. Publicly. There were no objections, no polite cover-ups, no one rushed to greet me, and no one tried to explain anything away. Because the sentence had already been spoken, and it didn't come from me. I gave a small, silent nod to the crew member, then walked past Genevieve and Jackson, without a word. Their silence was my music. I stepped onto the yacht. 2 heels, sharp, even, clicked against the teak deck. 1, 2, then silence again. I paused at the railing, letting the salt air fill my lungs, letting the ocean speak instead of me. Because there's a kind of power in not explaining, in not defending, in simply arriving, fully, quietly, unapologetically. I didn't need to search for it. The notification popped up while I was folding a towel in the lounge. Genevieve was going live on Instagram. Of course she was. The caption read, "A glimpse of tradition, legacy, and love from our family yacht." I tapped in. The screen filled with flickering candlelight and linen-draped tables, gold-rimmed glasses, perfect floral centerpieces, laughter, loud, polished, practiced. Genevieve stood at the center of it all, hair flawless, dress custom, voice dripping in curated warmth. "Hi, everyone," she said, smiling into the camera. "We're so excited to share this little piece of our tradition with you. There's nothing like being out on the water with family." She turned slightly to catch the golden hour light just right. Then she said it. That line she always used when trying to sound profound. Legacy is about who shows up, the ones who understand what we're building, who add to it, not take from it. I nearly laughed. Same speech, same tone, different year, same subtle dig. But then it happened. Right behind her, just off camera, a crew member walked past. Not loud, not rushed, just doing his job. And as he passed, his voice drifted perfectly into the mic. "Glad to have you aboard again, Ms. Hale, the owner." Silence. For a split second, the live stream paused, hung in that awkward, unscripted limbo. You could hear the engines humming, silverware clinking, someone coughing gently. And then, Genevieve froze. Her face didn't betray much, but the corners of her mouth twitched, her eyes darted, her grip on the champagne flute tightened. She smiled, too wide, too late. In the comments section, the shift was immediate. "Wait, she's the owner? Oh, this just got good. Plot twist, respect to Ms. Hale." Genevieve tried to recover, tapped the screen, fiddled with the angle, but the damage was done, and it was live. I didn't have to say a word. She had told her story. I had let the truth interrupt. Later that evening, she found me. I was standing near the port hallway, sipping water, reading a text from Clarissa. Genevieve stormed up, her heels sharp against the deck, voice sharp against the silence. "You planned that?" she hissed. I looked at her, calm. "Planned what?" "Don't play dumb. The crew, that timing, that comment." I took one sip. "He was doing his job. I just let you speak, and watched it fall apart." Her lips parted. No words came. "You don't belong here," she snapped finally. I smiled. "That's the thing, Genevieve. I don't need to belong. I own my place." She blinked like I'd slapped her, then turned and walked away. No audience, no control, no more script, just silence. And a truth that no longer needed permission to exist. That evening, the dining salon glowed with curated warmth. Candles flickered gently, wine glasses clinked softly, and beneath it all, the hum of a performance being rehearsed one too many times. Genevieve rose from her seat like she always did when it was her moment to shine. She held her champagne glass just high enough for the light to catch. And then, with that signature performative grace, she began. Tonight, we celebrate tradition, not just in name, but in meaning. We honor the people who carry that tradition forward, the ones who protect it, and most of all, the ones who add value to our legacy. Chin lifted, eyes misted, every word carefully chosen, every phrase calculated. But I didn't let it finish. I stood. No rush, no anger, just presence. Every fork stopped, every gaze shifted. I walked to the center of the table, reached into my leather folder, and laid down a printed document, face up. Before we toast to legacy, I said calmly, I'd like to contribute something to the conversation. Silence. I tapped the top of the page. This is a transcript of a Zoom call held last month between Genevieve Holloway and the family's legal advisor. I took a breath, then read, She's not blood. She shouldn't own a family asset. Gasps weren't audible, but the room shifted. Genevieve didn't speak. Couldn't. So I placed the second document on top. And this is the purchase agreement for the yacht. Down payment made by Clarissa Hale, sole investor, legal co-owner listed first. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. The truth did the heavy lifting. I'm not sharing this to cause drama, I continued. I'm sharing it because I'm done being spoken about in rooms I'm standing next to. Genevieve opened her mouth, then closed it again. Jackson stared at the papers like they were written in a language he'd never learned, which in some ways they were, the language of accountability. A cousin shifted awkwardly, someone else cleared their throat. Then, unexpectedly, Harold, one of the elder family friends, spoke from the far end of the table. I think we've all been told different versions of the truth. Several heads nodded, not outrage, not defense, just realization. I looked back at Genevieve. You can build whatever story you want, I said softly. Just not on my name. She sat down slowly. No rebuttal. Just the quiet unraveling of the narrative she thought would never be questioned. I gathered the papers with care, deliberate, not dramatic, and returned them to the folder. As I turned to leave the table, I paused. If you want the truth, I said, eyes scanning the room, don't ask the loudest voice. Ask the one with the receipts. And then I walked out. No one followed, no one clapped, and no one filled the silence. Because sometimes silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes silence means the story just changed. Genevieve didn't apologize. She didn't send a message, didn't pull me aside, didn't offer a carefully worded explanation, but she also didn't deny it anymore. The next morning I saw her seated in the lower salon, away from the others, staring into a glass of untouched wine. Her shoulders had softened, less rigid, less rehearsed. Her eyes, though, didn't meet anyone's. That told me enough. Back in our cabin, Jackson was standing by the built-in dresser, folding a shirt he hadn't worn. Something about that felt strange, like he needed something to do with his hands, like silence was heavier now than it had been before. I didn't say anything. I just sat on the edge of the bed and waited. He finally spoke, his voice quieter than I expected. I think I always knew. I looked at him, let him continue. Not everything, not the full extent, but I saw the moments. His voice cracked slightly. The digs, the exclusions, the way they looked past you, even when you were standing right there. He didn't sit down. He stayed standing, like the truth made it hard to rest. I didn't speak up, he admitted, because I thought if I stayed neutral, if I kept the peace, it would all work itself out. I nodded. Not out of forgiveness, not yet. But acknowledgement. That mattered more than I expected, because sometimes we don't need people to fix what they broke. We just need them to see it. Later that night, I walked out onto the deck alone. The wind was calmer now, less sharp. The sky cracked open, streaks of light slicing through the gray. It was quiet, but not empty. The kind of quiet that follows a storm, the kind that feels earned. I thought about the version of me who had boarded this yacht days ago, the woman who smiled through discomfort, who nodded to keep the room smooth, who bent herself into corners just to make space for others. I mourned her a little, not because she was weak, but because she was tired, and no one noticed. She tried so hard to be accepted, to be agreeable, to be less of a problem, but in doing so, she had slowly disappeared. I looked out over the open water, the sea reflecting a sky that had finally cleared. It didn't feel like victory, not exactly. It felt like peace. The kind of peace that doesn't arrive in grand declarations. It arrives in small things, like an unclenched jaw, a steady heartbeat, a breath that doesn't feel borrowed. Behind me, the yacht was still. No forced laughter, no clinking glasses, just people adjusting to a new version of reality. A version where I no longer asked for space. I simply occupied it. When I returned home, I didn't feel like someone who had won. There was no victory lap, no celebratory toast, no dramatic closing of doors. Just me, and a quiet house that had waited, without judgment, for my return. Same creaky floorboard near the pantry, same stack of unread magazines on the side table, same ceramic mug with the small crack near the handle, still sitting on the kitchen shelf. Nothing had changed, and yet, everything had. I rolled my suitcase into the hallway, let the silence settle, and then unpacked slowly. Not just clothes, but truth, clarity, and a spine I had rebuilt piece by piece without apology. A few days later, while organizing the drawer in our hallway credenza, I found it. Tucked between a folded grocery list and a tax receipt. A note. Small, unassuming, written in my father's unmistakable, blocky handwriting. It read, "You don't have to fight for a seat at someone else's table. Build your own." I sat with that paper in my lap for a long time. I didn't remember when he gave it to me. Maybe it came inside a birthday card. Maybe it had been slipped to me after a long, uncomfortable dinner where I tried too hard to blend in. But the moment I read it, I knew. This wasn't about revenge. It never was. It was about reclaiming my voice, my place, my peace. The following Sunday, I hosted brunch. Nothing elaborate, no monogrammed napkins, no curated playlists, just eggs, toast, fresh strawberries, and people who had earned a seat at my table. Jackson made the coffee. Callista brought lemon bars. Ronald showed up with his wife, and I gave them the sunniest seat by the window. I didn't invite everyone with the Holloway name, only the ones who knew how to sit down and really listen. At one point, Jackson leaned over and said softly, "Not everyone needs to come." I smiled. "Just the ones who belong, by spirit, not blood." He nodded and kissed my temple. Later that afternoon, as I rearranged the bookshelves in the dining room, I thought about Genevieve, about what she might say if she ever tried to apologize. Maybe she'd mention pressure, or tradition, or some vague excuse about protecting the family legacy. But I knew what I'd say in return, quietly, just to myself. "I forgive you, but I don't need you to say it." Because some peace isn't shared, it's claimed. That day's dining table wasn't the one from Jackson's parents' house, or the one Genevieve used to use for her curated family posts. It was mine, bought secondhand, refinished by hand, chosen with intention, not to impress, but to gather the kind of people who show up because they want to, not because tradition demands it. There was no toast that day, no performance, no hierarchy, just conversation, real, unscripted, messy, human, and laughter that didn't need a camera to feel true. I looked around the room and smiled. This seat? It was never given. I built it. Sometimes the loudest battles aren't the ones with shouting or slamming doors. They're the quiet ones, where you sit still, say nothing, and reclaim every part of yourself they tried to erase. Clarissa didn't seek revenge. She didn't yell. She didn't beg for a seat. She simply showed up, with the truth, with receipts, and with the strength to take back what was hers. Because in the end, healing doesn't always come from confrontation. It comes from recognition, from choosing who you allow at your table, and knowing that family is not about blood. It's about who shows up with love, respect, and truth. So maybe you've been made to feel small, left out, rewritten in someone else's story. If so, let this be your reminder. You don't have to fight for space. You can build your own. And you don't need their permission to exist fully. You are allowed to take up room. You are allowed to be seen. and you are allowed to walk away from anything that asks you to shrink. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something you've lived through or felt in your bones, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need it today. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones we shout, they're the ones we finally stop hiding.